Are some ideas just too dangerous to be heard? Well, throughout history, governments, religions, and other institutions have thought so. But at the same time, these ideas give us a hidden mental advantage, namely the ability to see reality as it is. And as I'll show in this video, this ability is a superpower that allows us to become happier and more successful than the vast majority of people. And I'm going to draw upon my years of experience in both the cognitive sciences and entrepreneurship to prove it. And the first of these banned books is What I Believe by Leo Tolstoy. Shortly after it was published in 1885, it was banned by the Russian Orthodox Church, believing the ideas contained in it were heresy. But what kinds of dangerous ideas does this book really contain? While Tolstoy's book here is far from a total rejection of Christianity, in it he rejects organized religion and argues that the institution of the church has completely distorted Jesus' true message. Core to his beliefs was a radical reconstruction of Christian ethics, and I believe these ethics can best be understood through a short story Tolstoy published separately entitled How Much Land Does a Man Need? The story follows Pahom, a peasant who believes that owning more land will bring him true happiness. He proclaims that if he owned enough land, then even the devil himself could not stop him. But the devil overhears this and concocts a plan. One day, Pahom learns of a unique opportunity from the Bashkirs, a simple and generous group of people who offer to sell him as much land as he can walk in one day, provided he returns to the starting point before sunset. Seeing this as the ultimate chance to secure wealth, Pahom marks out a vast area, pushing himself to cover as much ground as possible in one day. But toward the end of the day, he realizes he has overextended himself and quickly tries to get back to the starting point before sunset. In his greed, he overestimates his stamina. As he rushes back to the starting point, exhausted and desperate, he collapses and dies just as he reaches it, and the Bashkirs dig a 6-foot grave for him. In the end, the only land he truly needs is this 6-foot grave. So hopefully the moral of the story is clear here, but Tolstoy's sense of ethics was, at the time, a challenge to the Russian Orthodox Church and the overarching system of feudalism it was connected to. But why do religious institutions continue to ban books to this day? In some very real sense, it's actually the most anti-religious thing they could do. You see, although the famous Christian philosopher Thomas Aquinas and the equally well-known Muslim philosopher Avicenna differed in their religious views, they agreed upon one thing. If God created us in his image and God created humans to have reason, then reason must be something incredibly important and even divine. And so the exploration of ideas that potentially contradict the religion is a sort of gift, not something to be silenced. Because, as both Aquinas and Avicenna believed, if the religion is true, then our human reason will enable it to stand the test of contradictory ideas. As the 18th century political philosopher William Godwin wrote, "If he who employs coercion against me could mold me to his purposes by argument, no doubt he would. He pretends to punish me because his argument is strong, but he really punishes me because his argument is weak." The next book on this list also reveals this truth, but it reveals something even more important, that the goal of all book bans, no matter how big or small, is to suppress our critical thinking ability and secretly replace it with a manipulated, ideological thinking. In the book Life and Death in Shanghai, the author Nian Cheng recounts her harrowing experiences during the Cultural Revolution in China from 1966 to 1976. Cheng, a well-educated woman who worked for Shell Oil, was targeted by the Red Guards due to her Western ties and was falsely accused of being a spy. She was imprisoned for over 6 years in solitary confinement, enduring interrogation, psychological torture, and deprivation, yet she steadfastly refused to confess to fabricated charges. Throughout her imprisonment, she relied on intellectual resilience, inner strength, and a deep sense of personal dignity to survive. Upon her release, Cheng discovered that her only daughter, Mei Ping, had died under suspicious circumstances, likely killed for resisting Communist Party pressure. Heartbroken but determined, she sought the truth about her daughter's fate. The CCP has banned this book for obvious reasons, but what's even more telling is the actual context in which this story takes place. You see, Mao Zedong's modernization policy, called the Great Leap Forward, resulted in mass starvation, persecution, and economic turmoil, and this huge policy failure could have been the end for Mao. That is, if it weren't for what would come next. Instead of facing the reality, Mao and the Communist Party simply invented a new one that would come to be called the Cultural Revolution. This period saw the banning and burning of books, the destruction of older cultural values, and the persecution of professors and scientists. You see, culture wars like this are often used as convenient distractions for policy failures. Yes, they give people something else to focus on or someone else to blame, but they actively suppress our critical thinking ability. And I think this is the biggest lesson we can learn from this book. But this sort of manipulation doesn't belong to any one ideology, but instead, ideology, in some very real sense, is empty. In other words, whatever is the most convenient path to power at the moment is often what becomes the ideology. And our next book on this list, The Handmaid's Tale by Margaret Atwood, demonstrates this well. This book is banned in certain states in the US, but why exactly is it banned? Well, let's take a look at what the book is about. The Handmaid's Tale is a dystopian novel set in the near future in the Republic of Gilead, a totalitarian theocracy that has overthrown the US government. Due to environmental disasters and declining birth rates, fertile women, known as handmaids, are forced into reproductive servitude for high-ranking officials and their wives. The story follows Offred, a handmaid assigned to Commander Fred Waterford and his wife, Serena Joy. Her sole purpose is to conceive a child for them. She navigates the oppressive regime where women have no rights, and memories of her past life, her husband, Luke, and their daughter haunt her. Dystopian novels like this serve a purpose. They serve as a reminder to ourselves of everything we don't want our own society to become. And while the theme of this book might have seemed unrealistic 10 years ago, more and more we're seeing that if we're not proactive, something like Gilead might well become our future. Already, women around the world are deprived of the right to read, to go to school, or vote. And so, if we reflect a bit, what's really the danger of a dystopian novel like this? Well, just as we saw of the CCP in China and the Orthodox Church in Russia, the danger can be summed up in the following way. All of these books disrupt the utopian vision of those in power. You see, whether it's a Christian utopia, a communist utopia, a fascist utopia, or whatever, the very idea of utopia is the most dangerous idea, and we should be incredibly skeptical of those who seek to create utopias. The wisest people understand that humans are flawed, that nothing ever can be perfect. There will always be conflicts of ideas and policies, and that, actually, that's a good thing. And another book that exemplifies the dangers of this idea is the classic book 1984 by George Orwell, which was banned in the Soviet Union as well as some other countries. This book is another dystopian novel set in a totalitarian society ruled by the Party, led by the omnipotent and oppressive figure of Big Brother. The story follows Winston Smith, a member of the Party, who secretly despises its control and dreams of rebellion. In Oceania, the government controls every aspect of life, including history, language, and even thought, through mechanisms like Newspeak and the Thought Police. Winston begins a forbidden love affair with Julia, a fellow party member who also secretly rebels against the regime. Together, they seek freedom from the party's oppression. They believe they have found an ally in O'Brien, an inner party member who claims to be part of a secret resistance group called the Brotherhood. However, O'Brien is actually a loyal party officer who betrays them. From then on, Winston is endlessly tortured and brainwashed until he finally is under total mind control. So much so that he finally accepts what the party forces him to accept. 2 + 2 = 5. Simple. And he eventually comes to fully believe that. Once again, what is the true danger of this book? Well, at the time, the elites in the USSR believed that this book was a direct challenge to the Communist Party, and they were right. But do you see a trend here? This book is not simply a challenge to the Communist Party, it's a challenge to the concept of ideology itself. Ideology is rigid. It is a system of unquestionable beliefs. Book banning serves ideology because it allows those beliefs to remain unquestioned. But the loss we face is exactly the loss Winston faces in this book: his critical thinking ability, and therefore his freedom of thought. This book teaches us to be wary of the idea of ideological purity, that we must accept or reject something simply because it aligns or doesn't align with some ideology. And once we reject this idea of ideological purity, we regain our freedom. Once we reject the idea of ideological purity, we can then see things how they are, not through an ideological lens, but with all their flaws, faults, and problems. And why is this so important? Well, just as an engineer or an entrepreneur uses feedback to make improvements, it's only when we see the problems that we can move forward to create something better. And it's the last book on our list that exemplifies this. I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings by Maya Angelou, which is another book banned in some states in the US. And why? Apparently because it raises questions about racism and the dark history of America's past, a past that increasingly we do not want to acknowledge or face. This tells the true story of Maya and her brother, Bailey, who are sent to live with their grandmother in Stamps, Arkansas, where they experience the harsh realities of segregation and racism. Despite the oppression, Maya finds refuge in literature. As she grows older, Maya struggles with self-worth, displacement, and racial discrimination. She eventually moves to California, becomes the first female black streetcar conductor in San Francisco, and navigates her journey to adulthood. Throughout Angelou's experience, she emphasizes the true reason the Jim Crow laws of racial segregation were so harmful. Segregation separated people from each other so much that, even by law in many cases, black people and white people were prevented from forming friendships. And as we've learned from a vast body of psychological research, the more different groups of people lose day-to-day contact with each other, the easier it is to think of each other as less than human, and the easier it is to accept policies that harm the marginalized group. And why? Well, part of the reason is because we are shielded from the harm. We have the luxury of not seeing it, not being exposed to it, and so the harm remains something abstract rather than something concrete. You see, looking back at our history and identifying problems is a lot like looking back into our own personal lives and acknowledging our shortcomings. Just like in our personal lives, the purpose of looking back and reflecting like this isn't so we feel ashamed of ourselves or like we're bad people. That would be counterproductive. Instead, the reason we read books like this is to learn from problems, and even if we disagree with the viewpoint, to be informed about the existence of that viewpoint. There's a reason Stalin's and Mao's economic policies ended in disaster, why King Philip II of Spain was crushed by Queen Elizabeth's navy, or why the Roman Emperor Nero virtually destroyed Rome. In each case, the leaders simply didn't want to acknowledge problems, mistakes, or shortcomings, and instead preferred to create their own version of reality. And this is exactly the type of misguided horror that book bans seek to create. So, what will you take away from these books? And are there any others I didn't include here that you think should be on this list? Well, if you want to keep leveling up your critical thinking to make a massive impact, not only on your own life, but on the lives of countless others, then be sure to watch this next video.